The buffs are in, the nerfs are in as well, unfortunately, for some specs. Not a lot, but still, the melee meta for Mythic Plus has received some changes since last week, since normally we don't do these every week in terms of the same meta for the same specs, but they have indeed changed. And we're gonna show off some of these rankings based off how we do them in a really interesting way throughout this video, so make sure you stay tuned. And with too much bloat out of the way, let's look at Arms Warrior. And to start it off, Arms is gonna really go quick into B tier. Now, you might be looking at this and saying, hey, B tier is a shit tier. I'm doing more damage as an Arms. Or you could be looking at this and saying, hey, B tier is way better than what Arms got last week in terms of its overall performance in Mythic Plus. And you are correct, probably in both cases. But let me tell you why it's going to stay in B tier and what B tier means. Essentially, for today, B tier is around where people clear 16s. Not everybody in B tier clears the same amount of 16s across the board, across all dungeons, but overall, people around B tier are, or specs rather in B tier, are around the same kind of IO score, which is not entirely what we're basing off of this ranking off of, but 16s being B tier means quite a bit. And the reason why we don't have it higher or lower is because we need to have like a proper delineation, proper difference between some specs and some other specs, otherwise it would just be boring, and we will clarify that more towards the end, because even as a B tier spec, you can still enjoy some proper gaming as an Arms Warrior. And what better way to enjoy some proper and efficient gaming than with the all-new Arctis Game Buds? Oh my god, are these giga convenient. The wireless earbuds from SteelSeries that they just released are a gamer's best friends, especially if you also play on the Xbox or PlayStation 5. It comes with a super slim USB-C dongle that you can connect to your console, as well as having an internal Bluetooth 5.3 tech. And here's where the future resides. Once you connect your headset to your Bluetooth device, in my case, my phone, you can use the switch technology by tapping 3 times on the buds to swap from wireless to Bluetooth and vice versa. You can be gaming on your console, get a phone call and answer it seamlessly without taking the buds out of your ears or having to resync or repair them with your device. I literally use them to play some Space Marine 2, take a call from Marcelian calling me into the office, and actually working on a video, all without ever having to swap audio devices. They come with an Arctis phone app that lets you master control them, check their battery life, change their audio presets, and more. Their case is magnetic and chargeable through USB-C and have a total of 10 hours battery life. No more cables, no more taking up space, no more pairing it every time you want to use them from your console rig to your phone. To get yours real quick, check the link down in the description and use the code Marcelian for 10% off on your purchase. Thanks SteelSeries for providing us with the coolest gaming audio buds ever and making me realize I lived in a cave until today. One spec that has not changed in its overall point in the meta is Assassination, which is continuously an A tier spec, very close to being an S tier. The only reason why it is not an S tier is because it has not cleared 18s yet. 18 is like the new peak that we have this week, which is 1 or 2 key levels higher than last week, I feel. And there are definitely people that have cleared 18s. Assassination, unfortunately, is not one of them, but it has cleared 17s and it's way better than Arms and pretty much way better than every other B tier spec. So that's where it's going to be. Assassination is just very solid. It has a really good kit. Obviously, it's doing a giga damage. And that really helps when you're doing high keys. And it is the frontier spec for Rogue to actually push dungeons with. It's more than we can say about Outlaw. And unfortunately, Outlaw kind of dipped a little bit. It's B tier, but as you will see throughout this video, it's going to be bottom B tier, very close to getting into C tier. But once again, it's still clearing plus 16s. It's a key level below Assassination. Now, does that make it way worse than Assassination to get a separate tier? Probably, because otherwise there's gonna be no difference between these specs. But Outlaw is actually suffering, and it's very close to being C tier because it's quite a bit of difference between the rest of the B tier specs and Outlaw, but I feel like it's probably just coming a little bit into its own, or maybe it has hit a wall and this is where it's going to remain throughout the entirety of the season. But one spec that has definitely climbed is Survival. Definitely better than Outlaw, and still around Arms Warrior level. I think last time we had it was around C tier-ish in terms of overall performance. Now it's a little bit better. Definitely, I mean, obviously, Survival has been changed for a couple of weeks. Now, the buffs were in for a while, and I think we're just now starting to see its true potential. Maybe more and more people are waking up to the wonderful life that is Outlaw and realizing that as a Hunter spec, you definitely want muzzle more than you want counter shot, because those kicks in the dungeons be nasty as fuck, and Outlaw definitely provides assistance in that case, but obviously it brings the same kind of utility for all the Hunter specs. And why does that matter, you say? Well, because its direct competition would be the other Hunter specs, and there's definitely more competition towards when it comes to melee DPS. I guess Enhancement is not really a big competition with Survival. Do you know why? You probably won't be surprised. To nobody's surprise, Enhancement is our first S tier spec, confirmed to be one of the 3 DPS specs that has cleared plus 18s, because you need 3 DPS specs. I don't think we can do it for yet. Enhancement is ranking. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it might still be the best output DPS in the game. Probably does more damage than its S tier counterparts, but it is squishier and provides different types of utility. Now, with the shift to Prot Paladin as a tank, and if I'm not mistaken, Discipline Priest as the healer, you won't have a Shaman in your group as a Resto Shaman healer, so you will have to get it through Enhancement. You don't have to get it, but the fact that it brings the Poison Cleansing Totem and the Curse Dispel on top of probably the highest amount of damage in the game, period, maybe, probably, kind of, possibly, it definitely helps and definitely propels Enhancement to be an S tier spec. Feral, on the other hand, is all the way at the bottom. It's not necessarily a bad spec. I think there's very few Ferals that have started to do plus 16s, which would kind of, in this sense, qualify it for B tier, but there's so fewer people playing Feral at that level that I feel like there has to be a difference between Feral and Outlaw, and this is why these 2 specs are in the tiers that they are in, even though the top players of each spec has started to clear plus 16s. That doesn't necessarily mean that the entirety of the spec is the same level of strength, but that does mean that there's definitely hope for Feral, and if you do see Feral in C tier, don't be too sad, it's doing fine, but hopefully it would do fine, or it's just that Druid doesn't really seem to be like a popular class nowadays. Sure, people really loved Mark of the Wild for the versatility last season in Dragonflight, and that would definitely be a bonus that you can take, but the damage loss, the damage difference between Feral and something like even Assassination is so high that you probably cannot justify even that 2% versatility. Not from a Feral Druid in any case. The other S tier spec, again, as to nobody's surprise, will be Frost Death Knight at A tier, S tier, there you go. As the frontier melee, potentially one of the best melee in the game, probably the, like, it's very hard. It's actually neck and neck with Enhancement, and it has been throughout the entirety of the season. It does have some pluses that Enhancement does not. It's significantly tankier. It has really good party defensives. I mean, AMZ definitely really helps on some of these keys. I'm thinking Skarmorak or whatever its name is from Stonefall, where it just does those AoE damage pulses. Oh my god. If you sit in the AMZ, that is so good. And of course, that can function in a lot of other instances as well. On top of it, having really good damage. Even if you play Breath of Sindragosa, you still have the 45 seconds damage profile window with Pillar of Frost and Reaper's Mark. I've been playing some Frost DK of my own. It is a delicious spec, by the way. It does do very high damage. It feels like it obviously can, you know, beat Enhancement every now and again, but it feels like the overall performance in terms of the raw numbers might go to Enhancement a little bit more than it might do to Frost Death Knight. Fury Warrior. to probably a lot of people's surprise, I guess not surprise, but making people happy, is Fury Warrior is actually doing really well. It's very close to Arms. Like, I don't know exactly which one is better than the other. Maybe Arms is slightly better, and I would imagine because it might have a little bit more boss damage than Fury, but Fury still has the premier AoE burst. To this day, still probably one of the best AoE burst specs in the game, even after all of those nerfs. Of course, it also received some buffs coming into 11.07, and we're kind of seeing those buffs now, since I believe it was still around the B tier and still around middle of the pack. But I have heard a little birdie saying that there are some cooks happening with Fury that might see it be a little bit better. Now, I don't know if it's going to level up all the way to A tier. I think it's missing maybe some tremendous boss damage, and not just boss damage. Warrior always has a problem with not bringing actual utility to the group, and surprisingly, Warrior's not that tanky to some of these situations. You have some decent tools, but you cannot really compare it to Death Knights and Rogues and stuff like that, or at least Assassination in any case. Havoc is also kind of middle of the pack in terms of the overall rankings for all of the specs. It's obviously doing 16s, it's not a bad spec by any stretch of the imagination, and it is cranking. Of course, if you are going to be playing your, your prot paladins as a tank and you're not going to have Vengeance, then Havoc is going to be a definitely boon to your group, particularly since at the range of the plus 16s, you are more likely to have casters in your group as other DPS spots as well. So having that Havoc debuff, or that Demon Hunter debuff rather, is going to be very helpful for your casters, which is, it's a melee meta. But still, at the plus 16 level, casters still do their thing, okay? Okay. Red Paladin is a Giga Chad, still not Chad enough to make it into A tier, but it was very, very, very close. As of recording this video, I do want to point out that there haven't been any plus 17s logged yet. Maybe people are doing them, maybe they're kind of like hiding them, because, MDI started, and that's going to be relevant in like 2 specs on this list. But Red is still kind of at the same level as everybody else in the B tier, maybe slightly better. I think Red's overall, if you really want to, put a pin in it, or, put the dot on the I, or whatever you want to say, Red is overall slightly better than the rest of the B tier, which is why I opted to put it all the way in the front of the B tier, very close to A tier, not quite yet there, and that is once again just because it's not clearing 17s as of yet, whereas Assassination is. Subtlety also is not clearing 17s. You are hoping, come on, you are hoping a little bit. Subtlety is still in the 15s. I actually don't know if it's clearing 16s yet. I think, actually no, I think as of recording this video, there are two parses for Subtlety in 16s. This is like 2 dungeons, just 2. That's still 16s cleared, so yay for Subtlety, but it's nowhere near the hundreds that other specs have. Which, on one hand, that's great that people are actually pushing the spec to as high as it can possibly go, but it's still lacking behind everybody else, similar to Feral. But I think overall it is worse than Feral if we're gonna, really be nitpicky about all of this stuff. Subtlety didn't really receive a lot of buffs, which is criminal. I think the only real thing that happened to it in the last month or so was a 35 or 33% buff to Black Powder, something like that, which is like whatever. I actually do have to admit, I don't know exactly what Hero Talent Subtlety plays in the game, because there are 13 melee DPS specs with 2 Hero Talent each. That's 26 plus all the other range DPS specs that we do on this channel. It's kind of hard to keep up with, okay? But listen, if you are playing, I believe it's Trickster, and you are playing Nimble Flurry, that Black Powder buff is poop. It does not mean anything. I think Black Powder buff will probably only affect Deathstalker. I'm not sure if Deathstalker is the choice for Subtlety at the moment. If I recall, prior a couple of weeks ago, it might have been Trickster still as the way to play Subtlety. And if that's the case, then Black Powder doesn't really mean anything. Subtlety needs buff. That's what I'm trying to say, okay? Maybe I'm saying it in the wrong way with the wrong words, but Subtlety needs buff. I think we can all agree to that. Now, Unholy last week was a B tier spec, and since people figured out, oh shit, it actually does damage, because people played it in the MDI, and we've seen 15 million DPS pulls in the crowded wave from Unholy. I have seen people do some crazy stuff. I think it was Miscount that did that. That was glorious to see. It is good. I don't know if it rises to the level of Frost Death Knight. Not yet. Maybe we'll see more and more. Maybe people are waking up to the glory that is Unholy, with a much bigger AoE potential than Frost. I don't know if it has a bigger boss potential than Frost, but as it stands right now, it is in the 17's range with Assassination, kind of neck and neck. So we have the two pairs of buddies, Enhancement and Frost, Assassination and Unholy. And it's nice to see. I mean, what can I say about Unholy that I haven't said about Frost? Obviously, it has the same toolkit. It has the same amount of grips. It has more AoE damage, but it does scale, or it does ramp a little bit slower than Frost does. Frost is probably a little bit more consistent. Unholy does have its pluses. You are not that required to stick to your target, although it definitely helps, and it definitely dips your damage if you're not on your target, but you don't lose your entire 2-minute damage window if you know, step away for like 2 seconds, right? So that's a benefit for Unholy, but it's still significant, or at least visibly behind the S tier specs. And last but not least, the Windwalker Monk is going to go into C tier between these two other buddies. It's not doing too bad. I think it kind of dropped a little bit from last week, or rather every other spec has kind of climbed a little bit higher than our C tier buddies. It's kind of fine, but it's kind of in the same vein as Subtlety. It reaches a point where Monk is a cool class. Nobody really cares about the utility of Monks, and since that, well, in this case, Windwalker's damage is also so low, because Brewmaster pads a lot of damage, then there's no real incentive to use Windwalkers into pushing higher keys. Now, they might be competent in doing 16s, 17s, but we won't know until people do it. And until then, it's going to remain into C tier as an overall performance. And now, people look at these rankings and they kind of have a bitter taste in their mouth because, you know, why is my spec that low? Oh my god, my Fury Warrior beats every Unholy in my group. Okay, this is just purely based off of overall performance from the top players of the game, because they're the ones that are pushing the specs to their utmost potential. They're the ones that are getting everything out of the spec. We cannot rank Jimmy Neutron, who's like clicking his abomination randomly throughout the dungeon and not doing any damage because it's just sitting around waiting for stuff. Like, that's not going to help us understand how strong a spec is. Because if we're going to be looking at, like, let's say a +10 version of the Mythic Plus performance, you can see that they're all very equal and they're all pretty much into S and A tier, right? That's basically how good these specs are designed, and +10 is usually when you get your portals, where your vault eye level caps, where your gear caps, essentially. And it's still with, you know, both fortified and tyrannical. It's not yet at 12s where, you know, you start to really get into the heavy pushing of the keys. And we can go even further down in just regular +2s. Like, if you just hopped into a Mythic Plus dungeon, everybody's S tier. Is this what you want? Is this what you want to see? The specs are good, right? But if we just look at the, let's say, least performing players or the lowest level of keys, then it's just going to be a boring video because everybody's just performing really, really, really well at the average level of the group. And as a bonus, as promised, you can look at this graph right now, which kind of shows how these specs evolve over the course of going higher and higher into keys. You can see that the key level is here and the specs get more and more, I don't necessarily want to say popular, but you can see like the red dick slapping hard and how it looks up as you get to some of the higher end dungeons. Once you get into 16s, 17s, 18s, they start to dip off and you see like the consistent 4 specs, which are S and A tier. But once it's up on the 18s, you only really see Enhancement and Frost DK, hence as to why we're kind of ranking the specs the way that they are. But overall, it's still fine, it's still fun. Go play your Mythic Plus keys, get your Steel Series game buds because they're fucking lit, okay? They're really good, and enjoy. And if you don't like it and if you want to see exactly, but what about my range spec, you can still look at last week's DPS performance, which is still very fresh, is still very, let's say, relevant-ish. 1 or 2 specs might have moved, but it has all of the DPS spec and ranked against each other, which is not what you're gonna see when we have ranged just solo. So click on this video.